The girl nobody spoke to at recess grew up to build a company worth $400 million. That part people knew. What they didn't know was that she almost lost everything. Not the company, not the money, but the only thing that had ever mattered more than any of it. Her name was Céleste Fontaine Bradshaw. She had built Meridian Analytics from a second-hand laptop and a studio apartment in the Plateau Mont Royal, back when she was 26 and eating peanut butter on crackers because groceries cost money she didn't have. By the time she was 43, Meridian had offices in Toronto, Vancouver, and Chicago, and her face had appeared on the cover of Report on Business twice. None of that prepared her for what happened in October. The call came on a Tuesday morning, which was ordinary in every way except that it wasn't. Céleste was in her corner office on the 32nd floor, standing at the window the way she always did when she was thinking, watching the light come off Lake Ontario in long flat pieces. Her assistant knocked twice before opening the door. "It's St. Michael's," Petra said. "About your daughter." The window and the lake and the light all disappeared. Her daughter's name was Solange. She was 11 years old. She had her father's eyes and her grandmother's laugh, and a habit of carrying library books in her backpack, even on weekends, because she didn't like being caught somewhere with nothing to read. She had been at school that morning, and then she hadn't been at school, and now she was at St. Michael's Hospital with a fractured wrist and a head injury, and 2 emergency room doctors using words that Céleste's brain refused to process while she was still standing. She drove herself to the hospital. She did not remember the drive. Later, she would only remember the parking garage, the smell of it, the particular yellow of the lights. And then she was at the nurse's station, and a woman in scrubs was asking her to slow down. Solange's wrist was set. The head injury was a concussion, serious but not catastrophic. The doctors said she was lucky. They said that word, lucky, twice, which was 2 times more than Céleste could stand. She sat in the chair beside the hospital bed and held her daughter's unbandaged hand and did not say anything for a long time. Solange slept. The machines beeped. Somewhere down the hallway, someone was talking too loudly on a phone, and the fluorescent light above the bathroom door flickered once and then steadied. It was only when Solange was sleeping, really sleeping, that Céleste allowed herself to think about what she had almost lost. Not the company, not the apartment in Westmount or the house in the Laurentians. The small, warm weight of this child. The fact that she carried library books on weekends. The accident had happened on the school's property. A fall from climbing equipment, a crack in the rubberized surface that had been flagged for repair in August and was still unrepaired in October. Céleste didn't learn this until the next morning, when a parent she barely knew texted her a photo of the maintenance report dated 6 weeks earlier. She didn't do anything with the information right away. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult decisions, quietly, without moving, until she understood what it was she was actually holding. She hired a care aide to be with Solange during the recovery. The girl was under a strict concussion protocol. No screens, no reading, no loud sounds, which meant no school, no books, and a terrible restless boredom that settled over her like weather. Céleste cleared her schedule as much as she could, but Meridian was in the middle of a Series C close, and the timing was merciless. The care aide's name was Theodore something. He lasted 4 days. He was competent and professional, and Solange refused to speak to him, which was unusual because Solange spoke to everyone. The second aide was a woman named Gwen, who came with excellent references and a calm manner. Solange was polite to her in the tight, careful way of a child who has decided not to invest. She answered questions. She said please and thank you. She looked out the window. Céleste watched this from the doorway in the evenings, still in her coat from the office, her phone in her hand with 17 unread messages on it, and she understood that something was wrong that went deeper than a wrist and a concussion. Solange had stopped being herself. Not dramatically. There was no crying, no anger. She had just gone somewhere internal that Céleste couldn't reach. She asked Solange about it on a Wednesday evening. Solange was sitting up in bed with a cold compress on her forehead and Celeste sat at the edge of the mattress the way she had when Solange was small and needed company in the dark. "What's going on in there?" Celeste said. Solange looked at her hands. "Nothing. That's not true." A long pause. Then, "I was thinking about what would have happened if it was worse." Céleste didn't answer immediately. She had learned, with this child, that space was sometimes more useful than words. "I thought about you," Solange said quietly. "Like, what would have happened to you if something happened to me?" It was the most adult thing an 11-year-old had ever said to her. Celeste took her daughter's hand and didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. Then she said, "I'd survive, because you'd need me to." Solange looked at her for the first time all evening. "You work a lot, Maman." "I know. Like, a lot, I know." The child didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Gwen gave notice at the end of the week. She was apologetic about it. A family matter, she explained, in the careful way people explain things they don't entirely want to explain. Celeste thanked her and called the agency again that night. The agency sent someone new the following Monday. Her name was Dayo. She arrived at 8 in the morning, which was precisely when Celeste had asked, which was already unusual. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, with the kind of steady, unhurried way of moving that suggested she had learned not to rush at other people's pace. She wore a plain navy jacket over dark trousers and carried a canvas tote with a paperback sticking out of the top. Celeste registered the paperback. She didn't say anything about it. She took Dayo through the apartment. The quiet rooms, the kitchen with the good light, Solange's room at the end of the hall. She explained the concussion protocol in the careful, organized way she explained everything, and Dayo listened without taking notes, which Celeste found either impressive or alarming. "She doesn't want to be here," Celeste said, meaning Solange. "She wants to be at school. She wants to read. She's bored and she's frightened, and she's trying very hard not to show either of those things." Dayo looked at her steadily. "What does she like?" "Outside of reading, cooking shows, the complicated ones, not the competition ones. And she likes being outside, but we can't do that yet. Does she like talking to people, or does she find it tiring?" Celeste paused. "She likes talking when she has something interesting to say. She doesn't like small talk." "Okay," Dayo said. "Just that." Celeste left for the office with the specific anxious uncertainty of a person who does not know whether they have made a good decision or a foolish one. She called at noon. Dayo answered and said Solange was resting and things were fine. The composure in her voice was not the composure of someone performing reassurance. It was the composure of someone who actually had nothing alarming to report. Celeste came home at 6:30. Solange was in the kitchen. She was sitting at the island with her chin in her hand, watching Dayo make something that smelled like bay leaves and something sharper. Cardamom, maybe, or something Celeste didn't recognize. Dayo was narrating what she was doing in a low, even voice. Not performing it, just saying it. The way you'd talk to someone you expected to find interesting company. Solange was listening with her whole face, not politely. Actually. Celeste stood in the hallway and didn't announce herself. She heard Dayo say something about her mother teaching her to make this dish. She heard Solange say, "Did your mum cook a lot?" She heard Dayo say yes, she did, that cooking was how her mother showed that she was paying attention. She heard Solange go quiet for a moment and then say, very carefully, "My mum pays attention. She's just busy doing it from far away sometimes." Celeste stood in the hallway for another 30 seconds. Then she took off her coat and went into the kitchen and said hello. And Solange looked up, and there was something different in her eyes. Not healed, but present. Back in the room. The accident investigation moved slowly, the way these things did. The school board acknowledged the maintenance report. Their insurance carrier sent 2 letters that said nothing in very careful language. Celeste's lawyer said they had a strong case and that it would take time. She wasn't sleeping well. She was running on the particular kind of adrenaline that high-functioning people sustain for weeks without acknowledging it. Board calls, investor updates, due diligence requests that arrived at 11 at night and needed responses by 7 in the morning. She ate at her desk. She drank too much coffee and not enough water. She was fine, in all the ways that looked like fine from the outside. One evening, she came home later than she meant to, after a call that ran 2 hours over. It was past 9. The apartment was quiet and dark except for the kitchen light. Dayo was still there. Céleste had asked her to stay late. She remembered now. She had sent a message about it in the afternoon. The remains of dinner were on the counter. A plate had been set aside and covered, in the way her mother used to do when she came home late from her second job. Céleste stood and looked at the covered plate for a moment longer than necessary. She already ate, Dayo said, from the table by the window. She was writing something in a small notebook. We tried a new recipe. She picked the spices herself. How was she today? Good. Tired by 4, which is normal. She asked me 3 questions about Ghana during dinner, which I could tell she'd been holding on to for most of the day. Céleste almost smiled. She does that. Saves questions up. I know. I've started just leaving space for them around 3 o'clock. Céleste took her coat off and sat down at the kitchen island. She was more tired than she had realized. The kind of tired that sits behind the eyes. You don't have to stay, she said. It's late. I know, Dayo said, and didn't move right away, which wasn't odd but also wasn't quite professional. She looked at Céleste with a kind of steady attentiveness. Then she said, Have you eaten? Céleste had not eaten. She told herself she was only saying yes to the leftovers because it would have been rude to refuse. Dayo heated the plate without fuss and put it on the island with a glass of water and went back to her notebook. And Céleste ate in silence that was, unexpectedly, not uncomfortable. Can I ask you something? Céleste said. Yes, the notebook. What are you writing? A brief pause. Notes mostly. Things Solange said that I want to remember. Things to try tomorrow. Céleste looked at her. You take notes about your clients? I take notes about people I'm paying attention to, Dayo said, and the distinction was small, but the weight of it landed somewhere Céleste hadn't expected. She drove home that night. She was staying at her mother's apartment on the other side of the city during the worst of the school board negotiations, for reasons that had seemed practical and now seemed more complicated. Thinking about that sense. People I'm paying attention to, thinking about what Solange had said through the wall of the hallway. She pays attention from far away. She thought about the covered plate. The space left at 3 o'clock for saved-up questions. She thought about the fact that she had not, in the years since the divorce, allowed herself to notice when someone was paying attention to her. The week before Solange was cleared to return to school, Céleste came home one afternoon earlier than expected. A meeting canceled, an hour unexpectedly returned. She had her key in the lock and then stopped because she could hear voices through the door. Not distressed voices, the other kind. She opened the door quietly. Solange and Dayo were in the living room. Solange was lying on the couch with a pillow under her head, which she was allowed to do now, and Dayo was in the armchair across from her, and they were in the middle of what seemed to be a debate about whether or not it counted as cheating to look up the answer to a recipe question when you were cooking without a recipe. Solange was saying, with the particular gravity of an 11-year-old who has thought seriously about this, but if you don't know it's the right answer, then looking it up isn't cheating, it's just researching. Dayo said, What if you're a chef in a competition? That's different. That's like saying asking for help on a math test is the same as asking a friend for help on homework. Is it different? A pause. Yes, because the competition has rules about it. Homework doesn't, Dayo said. And Solange said, You're going to disagree, I can tell. And Dayo said, I'm going to think about it. Céleste stood in the hallway with her coat still on. She had spent 11 years watching her daughter be bright and difficult and interesting and trying to keep up with her. She had watched teachers struggle and a few teachers not struggle. She had watched Solange decide in the first 5 minutes whether someone was worth her time. She was watching her daughter be at ease, simply, completely at ease. She took her coat off and went into the kitchen instead of the living room and put on the kettle and looked out at the back lane with the October light going pale and thin and felt something loosen in her chest that had been very tight for a long time. She told herself it was gratitude, professional gratitude, appropriate and bounded. She was grateful for competent care. She was grateful that Solange was returning to herself. She was not. She was extremely clear about this, doing anything as impractical as developing feelings about someone who worked for her. She was organized about most things. She was considerably less organized about this. She noticed things she hadn't meant to notice. The way Dayo was quiet in a room without being absent. The fact that she had opinions about things and stated them without preamble. Without the performance of uncertainty, some people deployed around Céleste as a kind of deference. The paperback from the first day had been replaced by a different one, and then a third. She read across subjects, not randomly, Céleste eventually realized, but in linked chains, one book leading to another, following something. She found herself staying in the kitchen longer in the evenings. She found herself asking questions that were not about Solange's recovery. She was not oblivious to what this meant. She was simply choosing, with great deliberateness, not to act on what it meant, because the power dynamic was plain and the situation was not, and Solange needed stability more than Céleste needed anything. She kept that resolution for 10 days. On a Thursday morning, 2 days before Solange went back to school, Céleste was running late. She came through the kitchen at 7:45 with her coffee in one hand and her phone in the other and a board deck that needed 3 changes before 9. And she didn't see the edge of the kitchen island until she had already walked into it squarely with her hip. The coffee went. The phone stayed. The pain was spectacular. "God," she said, in French, and then in English, and then leaned against the counter and breathed for a moment. Dayo appeared in the doorway. She had clearly been there for a few seconds, taking stock. She crossed the kitchen, without rushing, looked at the spilled coffee and then at Céleste and said, "Hip or arm?" "Hip," Céleste said. "I'm fine." "I know," Dayo said, and went for the paper towels. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary, domestic, completely unremarkable thing. And somehow that was the moment. Not anything dramatic, not a late evening or a significant conversation. It was Dayo, matter-of-factly cleaning up spilled coffee, not making it into anything, not performing sympathy, just doing the practical thing with the same attention she brought to everything. Céleste looked at her. Dayo looked up. Neither of them said anything for a moment, and the silence was the kind that has something in it. "I need to say something," Céleste said, "and I need you to tell me if I've misread the situation, because if I have, then I will apologize, and we will never discuss it again, and Solange's care should not be affected by it at all." Dayo sat back on her heels and looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking you anything," Céleste said. "I'm telling you that I notice you. That's all. I notice you, and I think you might notice me, and I wanted to say it out loud because I'm 43 years old, and I have spent too many years not saying things out loud." A long silence. The kitchen was very quiet. From down the hallway came the particular creak of Solange turning over in bed. Dayo said, "The situation with Solange?" "I know," Céleste said. "I know. That's why I'm not asking anything. I'm just saying." Another silence. Then Dayo said carefully, "I did take this job to pay attention to your daughter. That was honest, yes. But you were right about the other thing." The kitchen held that between them for a moment. "Okay," Céleste said. "Okay." And she picked up her phone and the board deck and her bag, and she went to the door, and then she stopped and came back for the coffee she no longer had, and Dayo was still crouched by the kitchen island with a paper towel in her hand. And they both almost laughed, and Céleste thought, "There it is." Solange went back to school on a Monday. She left with her backpack and 2 library books she was not supposed to read yet, and a promise to ask for help if her head hurt. She turned at the door and said, to Dayo, "Will you be here when I get back?" Dayo said yes. Solange said, "Okay," and left. The apartment was quiet in the specific way it is when a child who fills rooms has just left one. Dayo cleaned up the breakfast things, and Céleste sat at the island with her second coffee, working through her email with one hand. And it was ordinary, and it was nothing, and it was one of the most comfortable mornings Celeste could remember. "She'll be fine," Dayo said, about Solange. "I know," Celeste said. "Then I know, thank you. She's a remarkable kid, she is." A pause. "She likes you, I like her, she doesn't like everybody." "I know, she told me that actually. Early on," she said. "I don't like most people." And I said, "Neither do I," and she looked at me like I had said something interesting instead of rude. Celeste smiled at her email. That would do it. The school board settled in November. It was not everything Celeste's lawyer had asked for, but it was enough, and more importantly, it included a binding commitment to complete the deferred maintenance across all elementary schools in the board by the following spring. Celeste had not expected that last part. Her lawyer had pushed for it specifically, knowing it would matter to Celeste more than the money. She signed the papers in a boardroom on King Street on a Tuesday afternoon, and when she came out into the cold, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let the November air do what November air does in Toronto, which is to remind you that you are a body and bodies feel things. She called her mother first, then she called Dayo. She didn't have a particular reason. Or she did, but she didn't say it. She just said, and Dayo said, "Good." And the conversation was 3 minutes long and entirely practical. And when she hung up, she was smiling at a concrete pillar in a parking structure, which was undignified, but she let herself have it. They started slowly. Lunches. When Solange was at school, and Celeste could move her noon call. A Saturday morning at a market in Kensington, where Dayo knew the woman who sold fufu flour and introduced Celeste as a friend, not a client, which Celeste noted. An evening in December, when Solange had a sleepover at a classmate's house and Celeste's apartment was quiet, and they sat at the kitchen table with takeout from a Ghanaian place. Dayo had been recommending for weeks and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with work or children or injury or settlement agreements. Dayo talked about her family's move from Accra when she was 7. About the specific bewilderment of a Toronto winter when you have not been told, concretely, how cold it would actually be. About her mother, who cooked to show she was paying attention. About her father, who had been an engineer and was now retired and made furniture in his garage and gave it to anyone who admired it, which meant his garage was perpetually almost empty. Celeste talked about the plateau apartment and the peanut butter crackers. About her first investor, a woman from Vancouver, who had sent her a handwritten note after the meeting saying she believed in the company, which was unusual, and which Celeste had kept and still had, somewhere. About her mother's apartment in NDG, with the orange kitchen and the specific smell of it. Coffee and something floral, always, no matter the season. About the divorce, which had not been terrible as divorces went, but had still taken something from her she hadn't fully named yet. She told Dayo things she had not told people she had known for 20 years. She wasn't sure why, except that Dayo listened the way she did everything else, without performance, without waiting for her turn to speak. She actually listened. "You do this thing," Dayo said at one point. "What thing?" "You start a sentence and then you reorganize it in the middle. Like you're editing while you talk." Celeste paused. "Do I?" "It's not a criticism, it's interesting. You start with the instinct, and then you course correct to the version you think is accurate. And you think those are different things?" "Sometimes. A beat. The first version is often more true." Celeste looked at her for a moment. "That's an uncomfortable observation." "I know," Dayo said. "Sorry. Don't be sorry. You're right. Solange figured it out in January." She didn't say anything for 2 weeks, which was, in its own way, the most unnerving part. Celeste knew her daughter. She knew the particular quality of Solange's silence when she was thinking something through. It was not withdrawal, it was processing, and it had its own texture. She asked about it finally, on a Saturday morning, the two of them eating toast in the kitchen. Solange said, looking at her toast, "Are you and Dayo friends now?" "Yes," Celeste said, carefully. Solange said, "Like, friends?" Celeste considered several things simultaneously. Then she said, "Is that okay with you?" A pause. Solange pressed the edge of her toast with her thumb. Then she said, "She's the one who figured out that I like space at 3 o'clock for questions. I know. Nobody else figured that out. I know." Another pause. Then Solange said, "She made you laugh at dinner last Tuesday. You did that real laugh, not the polite one." Celeste said nothing. She was not going to get through this conversation without being moved by it, and she had accepted that. "I don't mind," Solange said. "I just wanted to say I noticed." "You notice a lot," Celeste said. "I know," Solange said, with a composure that was half her mother and half nobody at all. "I get it from you." It was February by the time Celeste stopped qualifying what this was to herself. She had a habit, well established, of organizing her interior life into categories that felt manageable: gratitude, professional respect, personal regard, and she had been doing that with this for longer than was reasonable. She stopped doing it on a Tuesday, which was ordinary in every way except that it wasn't. They were in the apartment together. Solange was at school. Dayo was not working. She hadn't worked for Céleste in that capacity since December, when the concussion protocol was fully lifted, and Solange's recovery was complete. But she came by still, which had begun as an arrangement and had become a habit, and was now something else. She was reading in the armchair by the window. The February light was coming in at a low angle the way it did in winter, that particular pale gold, and Dayo had her feet tucked under her and the paperback from the tote bag. A new one. Céleste didn't recognize the spine, and she looked completely, naturally at ease. Céleste was working at the kitchen island. She looked up and across the open space of the apartment, and she thought, "I want this to be my life. Not the apartment. Not the quiet. The specific thing that was happening in it. This person. In this chair. In this light." She put her laptop down and crossed the apartment and sat on the arm of the couch, which was close but not unreasonably so, and Dayo looked up from her book. Céleste said, "I want to ask you something." Dayo said, "Okay, not a practical question. I know. I want." She stopped. She felt the old habit start, the course correction, the reorganization, the edited version. She let the first version come instead. "I want more of this. Not just Tuesdays, not just when it fits. Properly. I want this properly." Dayo looked at her for a long moment. The February light did what it did. "You know I'm going to need you to say that more specifically," Dayo said. "You're a business person. You know what properly means." Céleste almost laughed. She had not expected to almost laugh. "I'm asking you to be in my life. In Solange's life, which she will tell you herself she is fine with. Because she has already had the conversation with me. I'm asking if you want that." Outside the window, a streetcar went by, which was a very ordinary thing, and Dayo was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when she was actually thinking, and Céleste waited the way she had learned to wait with this person, without filling the space, without managing it. "Yes," Dayo said. "Just that." The February light came through the window and lay across the floor in long pale pieces, and the apartment held the two of them and all the ordinary things in it. The breakfast dishes drying, the library books on the counter, the notebook on the table with its notes about a child who saves her questions for 3 o'clock. And outside, the city went on doing what cities do, which is to continue without pausing for any of the moments that matter most to the people inside it. Céleste thought about the girl nobody spoke to at recess. She thought about the second-hand laptop and the crackers. She thought about the long way around to a thing you didn't know you were walking toward. She thought she might tell Solange first. Then she thought, Solange already knows. She was right about that, as she was right about most things that mattered. The only difference now was that she had stopped correcting herself before she got to the end of the sentence.